Welcome to the Libertarian Institute podcast. My name is Keith Knight. I am managing editor at the Libertarian Institute. Today, I'm joined by my colleague, Sheldon Richmond, to discuss one of the many things we have to offer at the Libertarian Institute, but specifically, we'll be discussing his book, What Social Animals Owe to Each Other. I want to start by going over a meeting that Sheldon had in 1991 with a gentleman named Joe Sobran. I believe it was called the Committee to Avert a Middle East Holocaust. Can you walk us through this meeting and what it was about?
Well, I was a press conference at the National Press Club going back to, it must have been in 91 already. This was during the George H.W. Bush years after when Iraq invaded, Iraq under Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. George Bush at first didn't want to get involved. He actually sounded like a non-interventionist for a while. But I think Margaret Thatcher, Prime Minister of Great Britain at the time, met with him in Colorado. I think it was some kind of gathering there, and told him not to go wobbly. I believe that was the quote. And so he suddenly turned into an interventionist. Well, turned back. Let's put it that way. Back into an interventionist, and told Saddam Hussein to get out of Kuwait. And the famous quote from Bush that came out of those years was his saying, "What we say goes," which I always thought was should be the motto of the U.S. government internationally, but even within the country, right? What we say goes. Good motto. They ought to use it. I think it was kind of spontaneous on Bush's part, but they should have copyrighted it or trademarked it immediately, so no one else could take it. I'm surprised Trump hasn't thought of it. So we hurriedly, a bunch of us non-interventionists, libertarians for the most part, some conservatives, it was kind of a coalition. We kind of threw together this committee because we were fearful that it could really set off war throughout the Middle East and just take a lot of lives and create a lot of destruction. It took the son of Bush to kind of really do that. The consequences, well, certainly set the precedent. Bush is going to war. Bush one's going to war against Iraq, and getting them out of Kuwait. And they killed a lot of people. But we threw this committee together. Phil Nicolaides, I don't know if you're going to put a link or somewhere to the video that's on YouTube of a National Press Club press conference, and we had some media come out to watch it, and it was hosted by Phil Nicolaides. He's passed away. I don't know I forgot what organization he was with at the time, but a couple of others, including Joe Sobran, who was a former editor at the National Review, big conservative writer who became more and more libertarian. Certainly the years when I knew him. Yeah, this is it. Go ahead and give away how old I am. Go ahead, Keith. It's fine with me.
I actually don't know. But when I read your
so each of us made remarks, and my particular remarks were that we were being smeared, and all the opponents of that war were being smeared. Hadn't started yet, I don't think, as isolationists. So my comments, which were pretty brief, were about the irony of that, because we were free traders. I mentioned that we were for free migration. Certainly that was my position. I don't know if everybody up on that panel would have agreed with me on that, but I'm for free migration. That means freedom of movement of people, and cultural relations with the world through voluntary contractual agreements, exchange, and things like that. So it seems ironic to call us isolationists. It reminds me of something Ron Paul once said. When he'd be opposing all these wars, and they would call him a xenophobe. And the definition of xenophobe seems to be somebody who doesn't want to bomb foreigners. And so it was kind of.
It seems like the term isolationist would apply far more to someone who was an active interventionist. It seems very isolating to, go around
Yeah.
picking fights with other countries, making your own country look like a bunch of imperialist aggressors. I would think that that is very isolating. But apparently, yeah, free trade, voluntary exchanges, this is something we really need to be afraid of. You end your first section of this conference by asking, how likely is it that someone would nuke his best customer? Walk us through the logic of this and what are the implications?
Yeah, I was trying to put myself back in that mindset. That was a long time ago. We're talking about 1991, right? So I don't know why I said nuke. I could have just said attack, because nuke makes you think, is he talking about Russia? Is he talking about China? Because nuke, not too many
Mhm.
countries have nuclear weapons. So I'm not sure why I said nuke, but the general point stands. Traders, it's not impossible, but traders have an incentive not to kill each other. People worry about China today, and we're a huge customer of goods that are assembled, at least at the very last stage, assembled in China. So they have a stamp of made in China, even though they're actually made all over the world. The final assembly may be in China. So a lot of stuff comes from, finally shipped from China, and and this was a point that classical liberals made all the time. There's an old saying that's sometimes attributed to Frederick Bastiat, but I don't think anyone's ever actually found it in his work. But the sentiment was certainly there. And the famous quote is, whoever said it, if goods can't cross borders, soldiers will. And that was the idea that the pro-free trade people were the pro-peace people. Some of the best examples, Bastiat's a great example, but two of the best examples a little bit later, England, mid-19th century, 1800s, Richard Cobden and John Bright. They were the peace movement, the middle-class bourgeois pro-peace movement, anti-colonialism, and free traders. They fought the Corn Laws, which were laws, corn was used as a more general term back then in England to mean any grain, really, and to benefit large landholders. The British government had high tariffs on foreign grain, wheat, and things that were generally known as corn. And John Bright and Richard Cobden, who were world famous in their day and beyond, mounted a public, kind of almost working man's movement, regular people's movement against that, on the grounds that bread is artificially expensive. Who's that hurting and who's that helping? It was helping some wealthy landowners at that time, and hurting, other people who were scratching by and needed to buy bread. And they ended up beating them, like in 1849 or so. Those laws were repealed. So, but it was always combined with peace. The two appeals, peace and free trade. That was the slogan. They went together. They weren't separate.
A lot of times, this worldview, I know that I've been accused of this a number of times, is that the libertarian, the social cooperation worldview assumes that people are just inherently good and they'll just do the right thing and you don't need a state. Do you assume that human beings are generally self interested?
Well, yeah, I believe they're generally self-interested. Uh, anytime you hear the free market attacked or the liberal worldview attacked, and when I say liberal, I mean I have a whole string of adjectives, right? Classical, full, comprehensive, laissez-faire liberal, because a lot of people call themselves liberal today who don't like free markets. I mean full liberalism. Any criticism of liberalism on the grounds that people are such and such, fill in the blank, isn't a terrible argument, because who do they think runs governments? Is this some alien race from Mars that come down who are super objective and neutral? I mean, so you can't say we can't have that. People are X because we can't have government because people are X.
Yeah.
Madison once said if men were angels, we wouldn't need government. My answer to him was, because men aren't angels is why we ought to be pretty suspicious of government, maybe not have it at all. mean, turn it around. Who does he think, runs the government? So yes, people are self-interested, and they don't always draw the line between what I would think of, kind of drawing on Ayn Rand, rational self-interest, or Aristotelian notion of self-interest, and a self-interest on the other side of the line. In other words, people willing to aggress. But what the market does, that government is bad at doing, is imposing incentives on people. The market has built into it an incentive structure. Namely, you want repeat dealings, you want repeat business, you want, so your reputation is important, and all those related things make self-interested people rationally self-interested, as opposed to how can I take advantage of everybody today, because you want repeat business. Now, it doesn't mean nobody ever goes over that line and does bad things to people. Of course that happens. But like I said, it would happen in any social system because it's people. But what it does is strongly build in incentives that punish you if you try to get away with cheating. You may get away with it once or twice, but especially in the days of internet and Yelp and all this stuff, although it was even true before that, you tried that and you were going to be found out and exposed. Consumer reports, or all kinds of ways. Word of mouth. Hey, you say to your neighbor, don't buy that. It's a piece of crap. They make it seem like it's a great thing, whatever it is, and it's not really good at all. That's fatal to a company. So the incentives are all good, pushing people to do good things, even if they don't want to do good things. I think Milton Friedman once said, we need a system that makes bad people do good things, gives incentives to bad people to do good things. It's not that we're banking on a change. It's the socialists, the Marxists at least, who thought there'd be a change in human nature once, right? Once you abolish private property, there's going to be this miraculous change, and people are going to be totally different. That's not a liberal view. We take people as they are. We think generally, I can't speak for all classical liberals. Me and a whole lot of classical liberals believe that, human nature is a constant over all this time, and we don't depend on any change, but we do understand the incentives that markets provide. So that's the approach.
Exactly. I'm reminded of a concept. I forget who first sort of articulated it this way, but the general understanding is think of someone in your life who you really cared about who passed away, and think of how difficult that was for you to handle, how much you thought about it, how much you stressed about it, how you might have spent time going to that funeral and spending time with the close relatives. That might have really upset you. Now compare that to how upset you get thinking about the 120,000 deaths in the Franco-Prussian War. Why don't you care 120,000 times more about that event than you do about the one single person who passed away? Those people were probably innocent and conscripted as well. You should feel way worse for them. And the answer is, well, human beings are self-interested. They never could have survived as long as they have if they were completely depressed about every single tragedy on Earth. So, as a survival mechanism, people are much more self-interested. So once you sort of embrace this concept, then it totally makes sense to say we should also have a foreign policy and domestic policy based on self-interest. If you think, well, China's really good, they're never going to try and take over America, okay, then we don't need a foreign policy of interventionism over Taiwan or anything. But even if you think they're self-interested, you would want to make it in their self-interest to not go to war with the United States by making them heavily dependent on you, by making them a trading partner. So I don't see any justification at all to say, well, you know what, libertarians, people are actually really greedy and bad. It's like, I've basically assumed that. That's why I'm not a gun owner, because I think everyone's good. I'm actually afraid of bad people. How did they end up turning this on us? The concept that people are self-interested, therefore you need a state, like as if Dick Cheney or Joe Biden are just virtuous people.
Well, it's what I was saying before. Who's going to be running foreign policy?
Yeah.
I mean, they're not angels or Mr. Spocks or computers that we managed to find somewhere. They're going to be human beings. So anything you're saying about human beings, you're saying about those people. So people properly are. I mean, I don't think we should hang our heads and say, woe is us. People are self-interested. They should be self-interested.
Yeah.
You get one life, I mean, at least as far as as I see it, you get one life, and in other contexts, people say, "Yeah, you have a life, make the most of it." Well, isn't that selfish? And then the other thing is, if the idea is you're supposed to sacrifice, not be self-interested, but sacrifice to others, isn't it incoherent? Because those others aren't allowed to accept sacrifices because they're supposed to be self-sacrificial. So everybody is
Exactly.
sacrificing, and it's like going around in a circle because no one's allowed to accept it. So it's not even a coherent idea. On foreign policy, of course, things get more complicated now. We're talking about governments and nation states, not individuals. So the analysis is a little complicated. I actually think America first versus whatever the other side calls themselves, internationalists, whatever they call themselves. I think that's a mistaken division. I mean, I think basically almost everybody, I think, gets this wrong in my view, and I've written about this. So you have one side saying, no, we should put America first. But it seems to me the opposite side, called the neocons or whatever we want to call them, they would say they're putting America first too.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to get into the motives here. Let's just take their worldviews as they express them. I mean, they may be totally wrong, but let's take it at face value. They think America's security in a small, dangerous world involves entangling alliances, backing Ukraine or backing other countries in war, even actively participating in war. And so it seems to be people talking past each other. If it's we say America first, well, the other side can be saying, I don't know why they actually don't argue that. Well, they do say it sometimes. No, our security also depends on this. So now we have to really look at the merits of the two cases. It's not we put America first and you don't. I mean, that seems to be the wrong way to go about it. And so I'd rather just take on the worldview of Irving, Bill Kristol and those people, and show where, first of all, their judgment has been so wrong. I mean, this century illustrates as starkly as you could wish that their judgment about war has been a disaster, has been way off. Lots of people killed, huge amounts of destruction all around the Middle East, certainly, but it's happening, obviously with Ukraine now and Russia. They have just been wrong. I don't think we should have it on the grounds of America first or America not first, because I don't think that joins the controversy.
Yeah, I don't think it gets to the heart of the divide just because so many interventionists will say, I really care about America. And if we don't stop Putin in Ukraine, then he'll be at war
Yeah.
with NATO in Poland. He'll keep expanding. If we don't stop China on the, South Taiwan Strait, I forget the name of all these areas.
Yeah.
Well, then China, we had a running senator say, well, it'll be our problem. You say it's not our problem in Taiwan, but it'll be a problem when they're, off the coast of San Francisco. So I kind of see them saying the same thing.
No, we have to look at those issues. Is that likely? Do they have the capability? Do they really have the motive to do that? And it's hard to tell the future, but we can certainly make reasoned judgments. I think we can also bring in a point that Brian Kaplan makes. He calls his position, I think, pragmatic pacifism, where he points out that even if you can find an exception or two, most of the decisions to get into wars, and I guess he's specifically talking here about the U.S., but he'd probably generalize it. Most of the moves to get into war have, been disasters, right? Contrary to all the predictions about, well, the boys will be back by Christmas, and it's going to be simple and glorious, and you can find very few exceptions where that was ever borne out. So let's not do it. If you can make a case that by not doing it, there's going to be some huge catastrophe, I mean, really big. This is kind of what Brian argues. Okay, then maybe you have a better case, but that's not the thing that really gets argued. That if we don't do this small, inexpensive thing, some huge catastrophe is going to happen. That's not the way it goes, and the results have been horrible. This country, I mean, this century, proves it.
Yeah. Can I ask how old you were during the Korean War? Do you have
Yeah,
or
I was 0 to 1.
oh,
Well, it
okay.
started what, in 51?
Uh,
I was born at the very end of
July of
40.
50 to
I was
July of
born at the end, was it
43.
still 50? I forget. Yeah, I wasn't reading the papers in those days.
Oh,
I was born the day after Christmas in 1949. So it was still the Truman administration. But
so
I wouldn't have been keeping up. Look, I didn't care back in those days. I wasn't of draft age.
yeah, oh yeah.
They weren't
So
drafting infants.
Kaplan basically says one of the wars that could be justified is the
Yeah,
Korean War, but
yes,
that's in retrospect. At the time, you had no clue that
right. Yeah,
you could get that outcome. And he compares it to it's the equivalent of shooting into a crowd a lot of times.
yeah,
And one time when you shot into a crowd, you caught a serial killer who happened to be on the loose. So therefore, every now and then it's good to just shoot into crowds. Because remember when you got that serial killer?
yes.
He says,
Right,
"No, that
and
is
it's
the
true.
completely wrong lesson
Right.
to
You're
extract
thinking of
from
the
it."
same things that I'm thinking of. You can look back, but it's hindsight, and say it's a good thing we went to war in Korea because South Korea is a heck of a lot better place to live than North Korea. Uh, I don't think anyone's going to question that, except for maybe some, holdout Maoist somewhere who's still thinks that North Korea is great. Uh, so that's true. Look at other wars. I mean, even the good war, the last good war, right, World War II, which is a very complicated situation. I'm not going to lay out I don't claim I have the right position on it, but if the World War begins because uh, England had made an assurance to Poland against the Nazis, they seem to forget that Stalin also invaded Poland and split Poland. And at the end of after the war, Poland was totally under the control of Stalin. So it went to save Poland. It didn't save Poland. So
Well,
here's
and
how
Sean,
wars work. They're messy. They're like who Randolph Bourne, who the great guy who said, war is the health of the state, said getting into a war is like, being on top of a wild elephant thinking you can steer it. Forget it.
that's an interesting analogy. Even the Korean War, which by the way, this was the point made by Niall Ferguson in his debate with Scott Horton. He said, "Well, look, the Korean War was justified." So he uses Kaplan's law again. They'll always bring up the exception. So
Yeah, yeah.
here, what I've come across, the Korean War resulted in an estimated 3 million deaths, including both military and civilian casualties, with approximately 1 million military deaths, 2 to 3 million civilian deaths. I mean, let's say South Korea is 100 times more free than North Korea. Would the average American say, a country would have the right to invade America and murder 2 to 3 million of us if it increased our freedom by 100 times? I don't even think people would buy into something like that. I mean, we're still so traumatized from 9/11, or still traumatized by Pearl Harbor because it's used as a justification for why we have to fight wars in the present. Even this one, even Korea is still on shaky grounds when you do basic empathy and say, well, is that something that we would justify? And these are lives. What about all the property damage of, buildings and infrastructure that everyone else relies on, all the malnutrition, all the suffering, all the unemployment, all the homelessness that occurs from this, all the post-traumatic stress disorder?
Yeah,
Even this one,
yeah.
this might be their best case, and still it's a
Well,
little shaky.
North Korea, had a lot of urbanized areas that were totally leveled. I mean,
Yeah.
we don't even really know. People don't realize that generally. It was a more developed place, I think, than Vietnam was. And look how long we were in Vietnam. What, 10 years? Winning
We're
every day. We won the body counts. I used to watch TV back then. Luckily, I escaped that draft legally, but I didn't have to turn to illegal means. But so I watched the body. They announced the body counts every day, and America was certainly putting up the points on the board. But
mhm.
what did we do there? We killed how many people? A million people or more, and total devastation. And then we left, and then the North took over the South anyway. So that was okay. A for effort.
Okay.
Yeah, no, not really, not really. And then, again, look at this century. You don't have to go back very far. Go back to 2000, 2001, uh, and what Bush did, and basically turning much of Iraq over to Iran. That wasn't. I didn't think that was in the playbook, right? I didn't know that we wanted to make Iran even more prominent by turning over Baghdad and southern Iraq to Iran, where the Shia are, and who outnumbered the Sunni, and then everything else. It's in a way it's a domino theory, but not quite the way the American Cold Warriors meant it.
Yeah, yeah,
We knocked down the dominoes.
yeah. I don't remember Rumsfeld selling us on the concept that if we risk, a war in Iraq, we could give it to Iran. So that's something we have to
Yeah,
account for.
right.
I,
And
I don't
they
remember
certainly
him
would have
saying
known
that.
that. They knew what the demographics of Iraq were, unless the plan was to go into Iran, and it just didn't work out. They felt they didn't have the opportunity because we haven't gone to. I mean, there's been covert war, there's been proxy war, there's been the CIA and Israel have helped terrorists like that. What's that kind of Mujahideen al-Haq, that weirdo terrorist group of Iranian Marxists, who a cult that they've done some stuff. There's been cyber war. Scientists have been killed, I believe, by the Israeli forces. So there's certainly been below the surface war, but there's not been that outright war against Iran. Even Trump got close to it, I guess, in his first term, but didn't go ahead with it. What did his daughter tell him? How many? Was that Syria or Iran?
That was Syria.
He held back because he learned that 150 people would die or something.
Oh, the one he held back on was Iran, where he gave a little pushback.
I thought
But
so.
the story was his daughter came to him and said, "Oh, look at what Assad is doing to the kids." So
So,
then he decided to bomb Syria. I don't know how true that story is. I know that
yeah.
that was heavily circulated, though.
And now we see what's happening in Syria.
Yeah, exactly. Now Al Muhammad Al Jalani's calling the shots, like Al Qaeda in Iraq is now running Syria. Okay, thank you guys.
Not that I'm an
Look,
Assad fan, but it was kind of known by people who paid some attention that minorities felt safe under Assad compared to ISIS or the Al Qaeda offshoot groups, which
yeah.
now are running Syria. I don't know about the guy who's now in charge. He's still making these conciliatory statements, whether he's had a change of heart over the years or it's phony. I certainly don't know. I don't read Arabic. I'm not a Syrian expert.
Mhm.
But there's certainly violence going on now. Some of it's sectarian. So we'll have to see how that turns out. But one of the people on the classical liberal side, a guy from the late 19th century, William Graham Sumner, wrote, and I quoted this recently on our blog. He wrote an essay called "The Conquest of the United States by Spain." This was after the Spanish-American War. And of course, the U.S. won the Spanish-American War pretty quickly and acquired the Philippines and Puerto Rico and some other places, Guam, I think. So it made a gain under McKinley, and then of course Teddy Roosevelt succeeded McKinley. We put down a bloody insurgency in the Philippines because, hey, it was ours now, and we didn't like uppity Filipinos trying to get rid of foreign rule. So it was a bloody put down. But Sumner, who was part of the American Anti-Imperialist League and was a well-known anti-imperialist, but also a total free trader, total laissez-faire guy, I mean, pro-capitalism all the way and pro-peace. Professor of sociology at Yale, one of the founders of American sociology. It was a big deal in those days. And people ought to read him. I've written about him a few times. But he, in that essay on Spain, the point of that title was, even though we've beaten Spain militarily, we've become Spain in our mentality. We're now a world power, and Spain was this decrepit, fading empire. And the fact that we went to war against them just shows we've now been infected by the Spanish virus, in effect, the imperial virus, and are succeeding Spain. And he says in that essay, they call us isolationists. He faced the same, charge. But he said something like, here in America, who wouldn't embrace isolation? A
Yeah.
lot of Americans escaped Europe to get away from all the wars and the constant fighting. Why don't we glory? He was kind of turning the word against them, right? He was a free trader. He certainly was not an isolationist. But as a rhetorical device, he turned it against them and said, who wouldn't embrace isolation and be able to pursue happiness, take care of our families, get wealthier through production and trade? And why, of course, we want to be isolated from the stuff going on in Europe and other places so we could pursue the good life. And so it's a great quote. People can find it just by looking at the blog. I think I put it up last week.
I want to talk about your book, What Social Animals Owe to Each Other. I think your greatest contribution has been to, get us away from what I guess you could call maybe isolating is just coming to me as a term because of our discussion now, but rugged individualism or this Robinson Crusoe sort of idea that libertarianism has. So a lot of times libertarians will categorize themselves as people who want to be left alone. And I respect a lot of people who say that, but I just think that is a terrible way to describe the philosophy of millions, billions of people cooperating for mutually beneficial voluntary exchanges. The concept that you would tell a human being, a member of the human race, going back to Aristotle, he was saying humans are social animals. The fact that you would tell a member of that species that being alone and isolated is what your ideas are about, you should expect them to be rejected. So instead of the dichotomy being, should people be alone or should people be together? You have completely turned that on its head and said, we're all always together. Anytime, even by talking to, say you're just talking to yourself, you didn't invent the English language. You're probably in a house someone else
Yeah.
built. You're probably generating electricity that was built by someone else. We're always sort of together. So will this togetherness be the result of cooperation based on mutually beneficial voluntary exchanges, or will it be some people having the monopoly right to coerce the rest? So I love how you have used social cooperation to define libertarianism as opposed to isolation, Robinson Crusoe alone on the island. With that in mind, let's go through 8 chapters. Chapter 10 is titled, I know, well, we can go through them fast. Chapter 10 is titled Government Undermines Social Cooperation. What does this mean?
Well, let me first say, and I'm not being falsely modest. I did not invent this concept of social cooperation. I've tried to really emphasize it, but yeah, you can find it in the whole line back of classical liberals. Bastiat made a huge deal of this. Adam Smith and the people even before that, the precursors. Ludwig, I've told the story many times, I've written about it. Ludwig von Mises was going to call his great treatise, which is about this thick, which is called Human Action, a Treatise on Economics. He was going to call it social cooperation. And I used to speculate that the second most common phrase in that book, the first being division of labor, the second most common is social cooperation. And then an old friend of mine put it through some computer program and counted the phrases, and I was right. It's the second most common phrase in that book. So look, liberalism and free markets, while certainly at one level it's individualist, because when you're doing an analysis of social processes, you got to get down to the basics. Only individuals act. Even when two individuals are cooperating and acting together, there's not a duo acting. I mean, that's a convenient figure of speech, but it's two people acting cooperatively. That's still, you have to get down to the individual. But then once you have individuals, the next thing we know is individual cooperate. That's what the division of labor is. That's what globalism is in the non-political sense of globalism. In other words, not government managed. So it can easily coincide with individualism. There's not a conflict between individualism and social and social cooperation. Herbert Spencer is another person who recognized this. He said, it seems like a paradox. It's really not, it's not a paradox. Individuals cooperate. Even competition is a form of cooperation. You know, if I walk into, well, this will sound old fashioned. If I walk into a shopping mall, do we still have shopping malls? And there are
Yes.
2 shoe stores there, and I need a pair of shoes. They're competing with each other, but what are they competing to do? They want to be the one to cooperate with me, who needs a pair of shoes. So it's 2 sides of the same coin: cooperation and competition. You often hear, socialist types say, "Well, why do we have to compete? Couldn't we just, couldn't we just cooperate? It sounds so cozy." Except they want compulsory cooperation, which doesn't sound so cozy. You know, real cooperation is natural to human beings. The division of labor goes back very far. We always, even if you go way, way back, and I'm no expert on that, but people lived in small clans, family. I mean, they never were on their own. When Bill Clinton, in the '90s said the era of big government is over, well, maybe not remember, but it was big news at the time. The very next sentence is, but we're not going back to a time when people fended for themselves. Well, there never was such a time.
Yeah.
There was no such time. Now, and the other side, our opponents will argue that we are atomistic individuals, atomistic, like atoms, ATOM, atomistic, which is ridiculous. I mean, if they think the image of libertarians is Ted Kaczynski minus the bombs, the letter bombs, but a guy living in a shack all by himself in, where was he? Montana, I don't know where the hell he was. If anybody thinks that's the liberal ideal, the classical liberal idea, it's a joke. Where's the free market? We talk about the free market almost 90% of the time, don't we, liberals? So how can it be atomistic? I call it's molecular individualism. Or I call it atomistic in another sense, as in Adam Smith, atomistic, not atomistic, but ADAM-istic. In other words, cooperation. The lines are running all over the place, right? I cooperate with you one day, joining together in associations, corporations, partnerships, all that stuff is free, peaceful association.
Yes, I think anyone who has run a business knows that in order to compete with someone, you first have to cooperate with like a billion people directly and indirectly in order to start a business, to have a location, to have investment, to have products, to have employees. You got to do a lot of cooperation before you compete with someone. So that's just people being
Well, you can read
naive.
Boston, and you can read Leonard Reed's little pamphlet, I Pencil, that he wrote in the '50s, sometime when he was the founder and longtime president of the Foundation for Economic Education, who I used to work for when I was editor of the magazine The Freeman for 15 years. I Pencil. So it's called I Pencil because it's in the voice of a pencil speaking. And his point there is, a pencil is one of the simplest things in the world. They're very cheap. A lot of used to give them away as advertising because it said, it would say the name of a company or something on the side. So, this is one of the simplest, cheapest things you can think of. And yet no one person can make a pencil. How can that be? Try making a pencil sometime. It takes like millions of people around the world who don't even know that they're all working on the same project in a way. People that grow the trees, the people that make the chemicals that become the paint, because pencils are yellow, or I have a black pencil. I'm talking about a regular pencil, not a mechanical pencil. The people that have to grow the rubber for the eraser, the people that have to mine the steel or whatever it is, aluminum, or I don't know what the metal is, for that little thing. It's called a ferrule that holds the eraser at the top. That little brass-looking thing. That I don't even know what it is. The so-called lead. It's not really lead. It's graphite. Has to be mined. That takes. And think of all the machinery have to be built to let those people do those things. So you can go back how many stages and how many years to make this simple pencil that we take so for granted. And and there's no and here's the the main point. There's no central director, right? We don't have a pencil commissar either in the U.S. or at the UN saying we got to make sure those pencils, get everybody, like a orchestra conductor. You do this, you do that. No, there's nobody doing that. So what accounts for it? Why are all these people making stuff that eventually become pencils? And basically the right amount, because we also want other things too. We don't want to make a zillion pencils and oh my gosh, we forgot to make all this other stuff. The price system, the spontaneous price system, which comes out of exchange, trade, which comes out of people having private property in products and in capital producers' goods that they freely exchange on the market to generate the prices, which are guides to employ people looking for work that they'll go where the higher wages are, other things equal, and the materials will go where the return is greatest. So metal and wood will go into pencils, but when we have enough pencils, that price is going to give them signals that maybe they would have put those resources into, a dozen other things we want. So that's how cooperation works. It's totally unplanned. It's what one earlier liberal or contemporary Adam Smith said was the product of human action, but not human design. It's undesigned order. And that's a very counterintuitive concept that most people don't understand. Undesigned order. You might say, how can there be undesigned order? It's got to be designed. But we have plenty of undesigned order. Language is undesigned order. Right? Nobody sat down and wrote up the English language. Some guy tried to do it with Esperanto, but how many people do you know speak Esperanto? He tried to make the perfect language. So he invented a language, which no one speaks except a few hobbyists or fanatics. But, and law largely was spontaneous order. It later got codified by governments and often screwed up in the process. But that stuff, as far as protecting life and respecting life and property, that was spontaneous through people's cooperation in the market.
Chapter 16 is titled In Praise of Profit. What do people need to know about profit? What are the misconceptions?
Yeah, well, again, not original with me. I just try to be a good communicator about this stuff because people aren't going to read, Human Action or Wealth of Nations or even Bastiat's stuff, which is very accessible and not real long. But the phrase that should make people just scratch their heads is people not profits, right? But people above profits, which is ridiculous because, as Mises points out so well in many places, consumers are free to buy or not buy, and consumers are sovereign. They are the captain, as he puts it. They are the captains by their choices to buy or abstention from buying. So profits are the result of decisions made by consumers to buy the product that's being offered. Now, profit also contains a lot of elements. There's not like one thing called profit, but it is generally, if you want to talk about a return to producers, an entrepreneur, a capitalist, a firm, that's because people want the product. And if there's something extraordinary about the profits, two things we can say. First of all, it sounds like the entrepreneur identified where some resources were undervalued because the price of the finished product in the future was much higher than the price he had to pay for the various components, right, that went into that had to ripen into the finished good. So if you can buy this stuff low and then sell the finished product high, you have spotted, this comes right out of Israel Kirzner, the great Austrian economist at NYU, who's one of the specialties is entrepreneurship. You've identified a discrepancy in prices, in effect, and you've fixed it because you've taken raw materials and labor and land and stuff, semi-finished goods, and you were able to buy all that stuff up per unit cheaper than the finished good, because consumers don't want the components. If I want a car and someone dumps on my front lawn steel, rubber, glass, whatever else is in there, onboard computer, wires, chips, I'm going to say thanks, Would you take this junk away? I want a car. And it takes time, and also you have to hire labor to turn that into a car. And so I'm not going to pay. I'm not going to pay for that what I would pay for the finished car. That's just common sense. So that's what it's all about. Now, I'll stop there. But profit is actually more complicated. It's not just the catching a discrepancy in price. It also contains an element of it is interest, because time passes, right? An entrepreneur pays workers and owners of land and other things. I may have to buy tools, machines, right, off of the people that are selling them or renting them. I pay them in the future with present dollars in the present for the prospect of waiting to get the price that the finished good, sometime in the future is going to bring. So I'm taking a chance. And so since time is passing, that's interest, right? Interest is a result of time preference and passage of time. So if the product sells as I expect, then part of my return is the interest. It's because time passed. And I paid people in future dollars, in present dollars, in anticipation of my collecting future dollars. So and the other thing about profit in the other sense is if I'm making extraordinary profit, other entrepreneurs will see that, and they're going to get into that industry. High extraordinary profits are like an engraved invitation to competition. It's like standing on the rooftop and yelling to potential competitors, "Hey, look at my industry. I'm making extraordinary profits." Well, that's like inviting competition. So new competition now will come in and buy up the components, which bids up the price. So they're not as low as they were. And when the new consumer goods are coming out, there's more of them, so the price is going down, which means profits in the pure entrepreneurial sense are fleeting. You can make profit for a while, but they don't last. Interest lasts, but pure profit is ephemeral. It disappears. So this idea that companies, just rake in the profits all the time, that's people don't understand what profit really is. But anyway, the bottom line is, not to make a pun here, but the bottom line is you got to be satisfying consumers. If you're making profits, that's a sign you're satisfying consumers.
Awesome.
You're not putting anything above people. It's about people.
Yes, no contradiction at all. There's 6 other things I wanted to go over, 6 other chapters. What do you say we do this next time? Is that okay? We've gone for 45 minutes here.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Terrific. So check out what social animals owe to each other at libertarianinstitute.org. If you make a donation and help us reach our goal of $60,000 raised, then you can get one of our books as a gift in exchange for a donation. Thanks to everyone for watching the Libertarian Institute podcast. Sheldon Richman, thank you as always.
My pleasure.